Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Ngā Kōrero Mō Te Wā Ki Te Eke Mai o Te Mātauranga, Conversations on the Future of Education. Today, we're exploring the importance of professional networks for early careers with Wintle from Albany Senior High School. Tēnā koe, Philly. It's so great to have you agree to be a part of one of these conversations about the future of education. And like I've done in the past, I wonder if you can just help for those who are listening to this podcast, a little bit of your background and what's brought you to where you are now.
Kia ora tātou, ko Whili tōku ingoa. Nau mai, haere mai ki te wānui a Tiriwa te Ngāhere. Kia ora everybody, I'm Whili and I am joining you from the base of the Waitakere Ranges in Titirangi in Tāmaki Makaurau in Auckland. I am currently in a hybrid position at Okahu Kurumātua Albany Senior High School, where I am part-time DPing and I am part-time looking after the English department, after a couple of years being in an acting deputy principal role as well. What has kind of taken me to that part in my profession, I started teaching in 2007. I taught at my own old high school on the North Shore of Auckland. I had a couple of stints overseas, but I've worked in a variety of schools in Auckland, high equity, low equity, index, and single sex co-ed, and also had a stint which I think sort of shaped my interest around education significantly, working for the Mind Lab, now Academy X, where I was working on a Master of Teaching and Education Leadership program, which was partnered with Ako Mata Tupu, Teach First NZ. And so we provided mentoring and support to beginning teachers who were a part of an employment-based initial teacher education program. And it was through that really tough, really rewarding experience. ITE is hard. But it was through that experience where I was able to make a lot of really powerful connections with incredible pre-service, but also at the same time beginning teachers. And I think that has really, it's changed the way I think about supporting teachers in education, because in that role, I got to see so much. I got to observe so many lessons of brand new teachers in hard schools, working with vulnerable young people. And so you got to see teaching at its absolute best. And honestly, there were some days where you saw teaching at its most challenging as well. And so that's where my real love for supporting teachers early in their career really grew. And it's something that I'm really keen on leaning into with the Ed Rising initiative as it finds its way.
So I find a lot of affinity there, Philly, with the initial teacher ed, because I was involved in that for over a decade here in New Zealand. And you're right, it's challenging. And there's often a disconnect between the initial teacher ed program and then what it's like in schools. And so as we're having this conversation about the future of education, and I know that your heart is also about, the sort of future focus, what education can be and could be and might be. The idea of where we focus our attention on professional development, whether that's initial teacher education or in service, and I know you've got a heart for those early career teachers, those ones who are just picking it up and going. What would you say are some of the big issues that we need to be thinking about in terms of the future of education when it comes to the preparation of our workforce?
It's an interesting question, and something that I have spent quite a lot of recent time really thinking about. And I think when I've thought of futures-focused education, I've always kind of thought that was synonymous with tech, and it's not to say that technology and the evolution of that and the place of that in our lives is not a really important conversation when it comes to futures thinking and future-centered education. But I've started kind of thinking that perhaps it's more of the opposite. My husband works for a company, Canva, and we were talking recently about, I was asking him, like, what do you think matters? Like, you work in big tech and you work with AI, and you're working with a product which millions of people are using all over the world. what do you think matters for young people moving into their future, as somebody who's working in a completely different context to me? And, it was like, ultimately, I think what is so important for young people to develop is really strong communication skills. And he started sort of listing these interdisciplinary skills that are already a part of our curriculum. They're skills that are a part of conversations that we're already having about what we know matters, about lateral thinking and creativity and the ability to collaborate and empathy and compassion and integrating views and perspectives that are different to your own, critical thinking, critical digital and media literacy, all of these things. And so I've kind of departed from this idea that futures education is tech-centered, and arrived at a place where I think it is ultimately people-centered and relationship-centered and community-centered.
Yeah.
The world, our communities that we live in are becoming increasingly diverse. It's a wonderful thing, and people are moving around, and the world is at the same time becoming more globalized and on the other hand, more diversified. And so if we are supporting young people to move into a future that will be more colorful and more diverse and more vibrant to the one that we're living in, then people are going to need to know how to make genuine, kind, warm, authentic connections with other people and within the communities that they're living in. So that's sort of what I come back to now when I'm thinking about futures thinking and future-centered education.
I tautoko with that. I think I'm loving what you're saying about being people-centered. And of course, one of the joys about interviewing you or just having this conversation with you, you're in a school, you're at the chalk front. Some of the other conversations I've had are with people who are in policy and have had kind of big careers in that area. But for someone who's at the chalk face, who's working on a daily basis with students, it seems to me that there's kind of a challenge that exists right at the moment that impacts particularly our early career teachers, where when we're thinking about what we are preparing our young people for, it seems we've got divergent views. We've got, on the one hand, those who are advocating that schools and education is about preparing students for a particular set of circumstances, a future that most often is described as in the way that it contributes to the building of our economy and in the future of all that something. On the other hand, we've got those who are advocating much more for learner agency, for that focus on allowing individuals to thrive and prosper and to be contributors to the situation that they're going to grow into. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, particularly as it applies from your experience in the school context and with the students you work with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think those two things, I don't know how separate those two things are. Like on the one hand, we're talking about agency and learner-centeredness and that self-efficacy, and it's easy to think about that as being isolation and learning in your own little echo chamber.
Yeah.
And then we're thinking of these other skills as being more people or relationship or community centered. For me, it's the same. For me, it's you learn more about yourself, your capacity, your capabilities, your potential through understanding other people around you and understanding what you can contribute to that little economy, if you want to call it that, if we're looking at a situation through a neoliberal lens. But I'm thinking of an activity that I did today with a tutor class. It's a bunch of year 11 to year 13 students. Their eyes nearly rolled out of their heads at the suggestion, and I had to end up being like the clown in the room, taking up the space, trying to kind of compensate for the awkwardness that was in the room. It was horrible to set up, but I was like, I'm going to persevere with this activity. And it was just an activity with a whole bunch of plastic cups, a rubber band, and a bunch of pieces of string. And students had to hold the end of the piece of string and arrange the cup into different formations, and there were different challenges. The joy of this task is that students don't have to talk to one another, or when they do talk, it's focused on something happening in front of them, as opposed to making deep connections and sort of revealing their deep-seated beliefs and desires and values. And by the end of it, everybody was having a laugh. The student who was the most reluctant, who actually left the room, and I had to say, get back in here, grow up and do the jolly thing, took a real leadership role in that group. And it just made me think about how important it is for young people to developing these skills of being able to not even look somebody else in the eye, but just have a conversation with the person next to them who they didn't know 5 minutes beforehand. And I do think, this is my 19th year in teaching. I do feel like it's harder for young people to do that now than it used to be. And I know it's hackneyed to talk about COVID. We're all jolly sick of people talking about it and the ramifications of that. But I do remember this really distinct moment of students coming back after, in Auckland anyway, having spent 6 months out of 2 years, a quarter of their 2 years at home in isolation without that kind of naturally occurring socialization, and putting students into groups, some sort of jigsaw activity, numbering kids off and putting them in together. And it was horrific. Like, it tanked like nothing had ever tanked before. And to the point that I had to address it with the class and be like, what is going on here? Like, am I the only person who can feel this in the room? And all of them were like, oh my gosh, never, ever, never make us talk to each other again. That was terrible. And they genuinely were really put off, at a much deeper level than I'd ever seen before, at having to talk to people that were new to them. And so I do feel like we've got this lag or this tail or a bit of catching up to do when it comes to supporting young people to, for example, develop those skills in collaboration or in communication. And in doing that, then they're developing more awareness of who they are and how they operate and how they language things and how they communicate effectively. And that's agentic, that's agency.
But where you are at Albany Senior High has got a pretty long-standing reputation for dealing effectively with the way that you've designed programs and pathways and things for students to do that. And I guess an observation I'd make as someone who's spent time in hundreds of schools through New Zealand is that it's quite unique what you're doing. It's not necessarily something I see in a lot of other schools, but B, it places a huge amount of expectation on teachers for the way that they operate as teachers. It's not necessarily the sort of teaching experience that many of our educators are prepared for in their initial teacher education. I'll be interested to hear what happens at your school to kind of induct and develop and grow teachers so that they actually take advantage of the environment they've got to develop students this way and not kind of revert to what school used to be like for them.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Like, in terms of inducting or onboarding, like, we have a process that any other school would have. We have a specialist classroom teacher who's amazing, who ensures that new teachers are supported to come into the environment. And that kind of thing would happen in any other school. Just the conversations that we'd have is like, our lessons are a lot longer and you're going to feel that at first. And our lessons are 100 minutes, so you can't really stand up and chalk and talk because you'll expire. Like, it's just not possible. Also, it's an open plan environment, so you have to be really conscious when you're delivering or doing some really sort of explicit delivery, because you could potentially be talking over another teacher. So you just have to manage yourself and manage your learning environment differently so that what is being said is being understood in the way that you intend it to be. But in terms of how people are brought on board, I think it would be through genuine support, and that looks different for every single person. I think for people who have taught in a traditional school, there is a process of deschooling that happens, and that doesn't mean that you completely divorce from the environment, and when you come into our school think, I don't want to have anything to do with that anymore. I've spent most of my career working in traditional schools, and schools work differently for different people. I love a tidy uniform for some schools. I understand what it means when the bell goes. These structures and routines work in some places. We've just chosen by design not to do them at Albany Senior High School. And so I think it takes time for some people to shed some of those other expectations that come with those hard lines, or those harder lines that are in other schools. But it sounds really vague, but it is through understanding that teacher and that teacher's practice that you can provide the best quality support. So just like we work with our young people, where you're really learning about the individual, you're understanding how they learn, how they operate, and how to best support them, and how to work sort of as a bit of a pit crew around that young person to support them towards meeting their academic goals. You have the same approach with your teachers, and you're learning about their practice, where their strengths are, where their pockets are, where they're needing a little bit more support. And you're finding the right people to come in around that person to support them until they find their way and sort of find their own momentum in that environment. And I think you find, like in any place, in any environment, after a little while, it makes sense. I remember coming in and we're first name basis, and I'd always, of course, been called Miss Wintle. And then, it's like, what do you get called? It's like, well, never get called Philippa. I've always been known as Philly. And then for students to start calling me Philly, it felt so peculiar. I felt like a 12-year-old. But now to have a student, call across the courtyard and be like, hey, Philly, how's your weekend? It's joyful. It's such a wonderful thing. And it just removes, not necessarily a barrier, but it changes the dynamic in that relationship. So immediately there's this sort of mutual respect, and you work hard to maintain that, but it also allows you to have harder conversations, I think, more easily, because that relationship is very quickly established.
Listening to you kind of excites me, hearing that you're acknowledging that there's diversity in our community and there's diversity in our schools, all right? And so that you're not arguing for a one size fits all. Not every school has to be like yours. And I guess what I'm taking too from hearing you speak is that really then it's incumbent on a school to develop its own culture, to be strongly, I guess, wedded or aligned with the values and the articulation of the mission and vision that they have. It's not just something you do because it's required in your school charter. It's something that it affects your place and your heart and your disposition. And I guess when we think about initial teacher ed, that's the almost impossible task that exists for initial teacher education. You can't prepare people for every single school context. You can prepare them with what they need to know in terms of being a pedagogue, being professional, being, their understanding of what curriculum is and what it structures. But then to be able to bring that knowledge and experience to a particular school setting becomes a responsibility that's firmly in the school. That's, I guess, what I'm hearing. So I guess the thing I'm interested to hear your response as now someone who's been, nearly 20 years in the school, and you referred to opportunities. You've done something in overseas situations. You've been with MindLab and so forth. How do we keep our young teachers engaged, enthused, excited, and seeing this as a profession, as a vocation, as something that they could stick with?
Yeah. Nearly 20 years in the saddle, and I have been. You notice a generational gap at a certain stage in your life. I noticed it this week when an English class of mine were writing about this old woman with crooked hands between the ages of 40 and 50, which I was deeply offended by, and let everybody know that as well. But the reason I say that is because I've recently been having these feelings of like nostalgia for my early career experience. And you can only kind of have that nostalgia for a time in your profession when you've been doing it for a wee while. And I was thinking about what felt like a heyday, but perhaps that's just my own professional bias. But this time when there was just so much opportunity in terms of professional learning and development. And I can remember sort of scouring around the internet, just being like, oh, what's available? What conference is there? Or what webinar? Or what Twitter account can I follow? How can I consume and ingest all of this amazing knowledge that other people have? And how can I find myself as a part of a network or a community? That probably would have been around, well, maybe from when I started teaching in 2007 to about, well, 2017 is when I had my child and sort of went to a slightly different planet. But it was a period of what felt like like a smorgasbord of professional development opportunities. And then I think about the last 5 years or so, particularly again, and I'm bringing it up again, but from 2020,
Okay.
or from the Tomorrow School Review, really, when there was a switch in government to Labour, and then there was a lot of research and, reporting around what needs to shift. And I think the profession largely was really excited about that. Okay, NCA is going to be reviewed. Then we had the NCA change packet. Then we had new matrices, the SEGs that were established. We had a pathway for 3 new years of NCEA. We had Te Mātai as a curriculum that was getting introduced. I don't think the implementation of that was that took a while. I think there was a bit of over consultation, personally. And then there's another change of government, and now we've got a U-turn, and now we've got new numeracy and literacy and a brand new curriculum, and it turns out NCA is getting scrapped altogether. So the last 5-6 years there has been so much change, and so all of that change has been change that we have received, either because the world has changed in the blink of an eye and we've needed to respond to that, and that's professionally appropriate, or because of situations outside of our control. We can vote, but it doesn't matter what is going to happen. If education continues to be a political football, someone else is going to be telling us what we have to do. And so there's teachers in the first 10 years of their teaching experience. It takes you 5 years to really feel like you know what you're doing in your job, to kind of come out the other side of it and be like, I got this. And then the next 5 years, there's all of this tremendous school, sector-wide response. I don't feel like teachers in their first 10 years of teaching experience had the same opportunities, certainly, that I did. And I don't think that's being having rose-tinted glasses and being overly nostalgic or romanticizing a time professionally. I think it's just because the way that the world has happened over the last 5 years in particular, and where we've needed to focus our attention. And so I'm really excited about being a part of some initiative that engages teachers in this really formative stage of their career and get people thinking, yep, of course we have to do what we need to do, and we need to know how to do that really well. But additionally, what an awesome job we have.
Yes.
What a tremendous responsibility, but how much opportunity do we have to be creative, to make connections with other schools, to create or nurture sort of ecosystems with other teachers from other parts of the country, to be doing shared and collaborative inquiries, to be presenting professional development in your own schools, to be making meaningful connections with your communities. There is just so much scope and so much breadth and and that word opportunity that we have in the job that we do. And I would love to work with a cross section of teachers in those first 10 years and support them to kind of see or to find that same joy in teaching that certainly I had and continue to have, but certainly had in particular in those first 10 years of teaching.
Well, I think you've put the widow out there, Philly. That's the challenge. And I guess for people who may be listening to this podcast, whether it's a principal who is looking at some of those early career teachers in their school, or whether it's someone who is beginning that journey of teaching, there's an invitation, right, to become part of this network. You're creating an opportunity where connections can be made and experiences and opportunities to learn are going to develop. Um, I think we'll wrap it there because we've got the time. But I just loved listening to the way that you've given expression and really reinforced two things in that last part. Particularly, you took us all the way back to that initial conversation with your husband, how important those competencies that you're identifying for students actually are for teachers as well. You know, to be able to cope with that change, to demonstrate the capacity to, be resilient, to divert attention to change, all that sort of embrace change and respond to it. But on the other hand, to understand that you don't have to do it yourself. Actually, your strength comes through the network that you establish, and the value of that professional network, I believe, like you do, is going to be the thing that will be the game changer for our future education profession. Anyway, a last word to you if you've got one, and then we'll finish off.
Only that we are so lucky and so privileged to be doing the job that we're doing, working with young people at the most tumultuous, vulnerable, and hectic time of their lives. And what better way to be supporting those young people into their futures by making connections with other teachers who are doing the same awesome job. So yeah, I really look forward to our ongoing corridor and visioning so that we can really crystallize how it is that we're going to make these really rich connections with people in those first 10 years. But yeah, like you said, if you're listening out there and this is mildly interesting to you, then please do get in touch and look forward to the mahi henceforth.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa, and we'll certainly be in touch in that online community with you. Thank you, Philly.
Ate wā.